giant robots smashing into other giant robots.
Hello, everyone, and we're back. And this is the Giant Robots Smashing into Other Giant Robots podcast, where we explore the design, development, and business of great products. It's my voice again, so it's your host, Sammy Birnbaum. And today I'm joined by Quentin de Metz, co-founder and CTO of Pennylane, the all-in-one financial and accounting platform for business owners and their bookkeepers. I'm really excited about this one because I know as a company you started in 2020, yet you claim that you already support 1 gazillion French companies. Is that fair?
Well, that's an approximation.
Yeah.
But we do have 1 million French companies as customers today.
Oh, wow. So that's incredible. Okay, I want to get into that. But before I do, I need to set the scene because people are going to be like, you're jumping into the deep end. So give us a background beyond my short introduction about what Pennylane is. And sometimes maybe the helpful way to frame this is to think about, what problem is Pennylane trying to solve and how is Pennylane doing that?
So the problem we're trying to solve is we noticed that small business owners, they outsource their bookkeeping to accounting firms. And what that means is their accountant needs to get access to their financial data on a regular basis, specifically to file taxes, and in France to file VAT, which happens generally on a monthly basis. This means that the accountant contacts the business owner on a regular basis to get access to all things financial, so bank statements, invoices, either supplier invoices, things that the business has purchased, customer invoices, things that the business has invoiced, which of these have been paid, which are late, and any other meaningful life cycle events of the business. For the business owner, this is administrative overhead for them.
Yeah.
What they get out of it is compliance, but no significant value in the short term, because the actual financial analysis happens once a year at year's end when the bookkeeping and book closing is performed. And so what we've noticed is that business owners typically have their Excel spreadsheet to track their accounting. They do some kind of simplified accounting where they track their cash flow to figure out how their business is doing. And so they're doing the bookkeeping work in a simplified manner, but there's duplicate work happening there. And the way I like to explain this is they are synchronizing their business's state with the accountant's accounting software. And this is happening somehow over email. They need to tell the accountant what is happening, what they've purchased, what they've sold, what's happening. And this happens over email, which is not a great collaborative medium.
I know this wasn't your intention, but this has just got really personal because you've basically described how I attempt to manage my own wife's occupational therapy business. That's a free advertisement for my wife, which should be pleased about. But yeah, this is my weekly grind of trying to kind of understand financially, like internally, where the bookkeeping is up to. So it sounds like those kind of internal bookkeeping that we do, whereas we only really get the accurate figures and helpful analysis at the year's end. And not only that, I also struggle to maintain compliance as it changes. So things happen and they change, and then I have to try and keep up with that as well. So this resonates. But carry on. Your explanation is really hitting home.
And so what we've decided to build, so Pennylane is a software as a service. We've decided to build a all-in-one software where the business owner can centralize all of their financial flows. They can connect all of their bank accounts, and the bank account statements are synchronized automatically. They can use our software to invoice their own customers. They can use our mobile app to scan the invoices of things they've purchased They can give a mobile app to their employees for expenses. And this gives them a centralized place to manage their business. On top of this, their accountant uses Pennylane for bookkeeping. It is a full-fledged accounting software. So anything that when the business owner connects their bank account or invoices a customer with Pennylane, the accountant sees that information in real time. There is no need to ask about what are the new invoices, what are the new financial events that happened. Everything happens in a single source of truth.
And is your background a financial one?
My background is in engineering.
I mean, the way that you've described kind of this product, it sounds like it's really solving a problem on two ends, because
Correct.
it's solving the problem for the business owner, but it's also solving the problem for the accountants.
Yes.
That's really, really interesting. So I often then like to ask people, understanding the product, and I mentioned to you before we started recording how you've the Pennylane song is now running through my head, and I apologize to all the listeners who are familiar with the Beatles who are now going to be humming the Pennylane tune to themselves. What is like something that, and you say you come from an engineering background, so maybe in the last couple of weeks or the last month, that's been keeping you up at night, or what are the rabbit holes that you've been going down recently? What are challenges that you recently have become quite opinionated or passionate about?
I think I can give two answers to this. The first one that is keeping me up at night is our company is very successful in terms of market share in France. We have added more than 500,000 new businesses since September on Pennylane.
So did you say 500,000?
I did, yes.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How has that been, like onboarding 500,000 businesses?
So our distribution model is mostly indirect. We go to accounting firms and tell them we will streamline their operations and make them save time if they switch accounting software and onboard their businesses, their customers to Pennylane. And for small businesses, I would say they enjoy having their accountant be more assertive into how they should be organized on the financial side. Mm-hmm. And if they follow the accountant's recommendations and use Pennylane as a single source of truth, they are less lost and they save time. The accountant is more productive. The accountant doesn't need to ask them so much about financial data so often. And so there is a virtuous circle in terms of productivity gains. And so we sell to accounting firms, and then they onboard their 500 or 5,000 or 50,000 businesses.
I see. So it's kind of like a B2B platform in the way that you approach the market.
We have 5 or 10% of our businesses who sign up direct on our websites, mm-hmm. but 90% of our volume comes through accounting firms.
So I'm doing this thing where I'm weaving. I will come back to what's keeping you up at night.
Yes.
But it sounds to me, getting 500, like this sounds like a really incredible rate of growth. Is that because just no one was doing this beforehand? Like, are there any competitors in your market?
I think we are one of the first ones to come up with this concept of all-in-one for business owners and accountants on the small and medium business segment.
Okay.
6 years down the line, we are not the only ones doing it. But I think we were first, or quickly most successful, or most thorough, or with the best product market fit on this mm-hmm. idea. If you look at the overall market, software for accounting firms, this is one of the first and earliest software markets, right? Automating or digitizing accounting is something that happened already in the 60s. There have been multiple generations of accounting software, very large and successful businesses. And what we've seen in France is there are dominant players that seem to be a little bit asleep at the wheel. They are not cloud-based. They run on Windows VMs in the cloud or on-premise. They have no APIs. They are kind of stuck in some earlier century. On top of this, some of these firms have been acquired by private equity firms whose interest it is not necessarily or not obviously to continue to invest in R&D, but it seems to milk the business for profit, which means increase price, save money on service, which is pushing accounting firms into our arms. We are in the right place at the right time.
Amazing. So there's a level of innovation in a market that is sometimes not responding as quickly as kind of you are able to, which, like you described, is kind of like a perfect storm. I want to go back to then, what's your biggest challenge right now? What's keeping you up at night?
I would say mostly keeping the lights on as we scale in terms of data volume and traffic so quickly, and making sure that everything that we build for our customers meets a high standard of quality.
Interesting. So when you say keeping the lights on, do you mean in terms of like keeping the servers up and like keeping like everything running smoothly from the tech side?
As an engineer, yes, making sure everything is running smoothly, that everyone has the right performance guarantees, stability. Yes.
See, yeah, that must be really difficult because you've gone from a startup. So when you started, so you're working with Ruby on Rails, which at thoughtbot we're consultants in Ruby on Rails, and so we build nearly all of our projects using that tech stack, unless something else is specifically required. Who was the first person to write Rails init or Rails new? I can't even remember how you start the projects now.
I was.
So there you go. So you were the one who started in 2020, and you start with this Rails project as a single developer. How do you handle that, going from a startup with one developer, and how many engineers do you have now?
About 400.
About 400 engineers. So how are you able to do that, trying to stay like lean and manage quality and keep those lights on? That must be really difficult.
We make do. I would elaborate by saying we pay special attention to whom we hire to make sure that we have the right balance, people who are balanced between being customer-centric, but also building things the right way. This is a interesting equilibrium to find and not always obvious. And we invest. We have a strong DNA, and we invest in standardizing both through documentation, linters, automated tests, trainings, to make sure that what we build is standardized to the maximum, so that it's when we make a mistake, when we have downtime, when we have a bug, we always ask ourselves, can we make the standard better to eliminate this class of bugs? Can we introduce a test that goes through all of our controllers or all of our models to make sure that this type of bug cannot happen in all the other scopes of our product? Or we write the right linter rule, the right Rubocop for this.
Yeah.
And we invest also, this is adjacent, in developer experience, developer productivity, to make sure that our CI runs quickly at scale, to make sure that the local setup for the development environment is relatively pain-free, things like this.
So, like, as an engineer, I love this. I'm sorry for those listeners who maybe aren't so technical, but like, this is such a difficult challenge because you yourself, your principles when it comes to software development. So, for example, at thoughtbot, we follow a lot of kind of extreme programming methodologies. We practice test-driven development. We have books that we've published with certain principles. I personally lean on Sandy Metz a lot. Solid principles, like all of these kind of design patterns in code are so crucial and so important. I don't know if you agree with me on this. Like, I think I read this in Extreme Programming, where Fowler or Bex talks about the biggest cost to your business will be code quality. So that will be your ability to change the code and how much it costs to do so. And therefore, when starting a business, that has to be the highest priority, is the quality of your code. But I cannot imagine how difficult that becomes once you spread into multiple teams across 400 plus engineers. So are there specific principles that you try to maintain? So like, for example, test-driven development or certain solid principles, or I saw that you mentioned on your bio on LinkedIn, with JavaScript, you can create any problem. Now, I happen to agree with that, much to the the hate of the JavaScript developers we have at thoughtbot. But again, then are you also very prescriptive in perhaps you lean towards Hotwire more, which is it's a library that you can use, which uses a lot less JavaScript. Are there things like that which are helping you?
Absolutely. So when I mentioned earlier standardizing, we've standardized on using React and TypeScript on the front end, and Rails provides only the API.
Nice.
And to completely eliminate, I have this quote about JavaScript on my bio because I think it's very difficult to get things right and somewhat bug-free on the front end with vanilla JavaScript. And I think TypeScript is the right answer to this problem. Where this falls flat is when the front end is communicating with the back end. How do you make sure that your front end types correspond to what the API is actually returning? And so we have standardized a way to document all of our API endpoints with OpenAPI. So we have one OpenAPI schema file per endpoint. We have some tests that validate the OpenAPI schemas and forbid uses of some patterns or enforce others.
Got it. Yeah.
And we auto-generate front-end types from these OpenAPI schemas. We even auto-generate query clients on the front end with one method that is typed per API endpoint that you can only call with the right parameters, the right arguments that your backend expects. So that on the front end, you have full type safety throughout your front end and when communicating to the backend and getting a response from the backend. That's one example.
Nice. And currently it's a monolith?
Correct.
And this is an old thing that people say kind of about Rails. It's a lie. Let's get that out of the way. But they say that Rails struggles at scale. So how have you found kind of handling performance? As you said, like your throughput is now massively increasing and probably your data load is quite high.
So we process about 10,000 HTTP requests per second. What we found is Rails is mostly great for this. I think there's been a lot of investment in Rails. Shout out to the sponsors at Shopify, especially, but not only, for investing in core Ruby performance. I think there's been a lot of progress made there. There are some anti-patterns in Rails which we avoid, which we forbid. For example, I find that Rails is very geared towards handling single instances of a model, and it encourages you in the documentation to work with callbacks. Anybody who's worked on an application with a reasonable amount of complexity falls very quickly into what I would call callback hell.
Yeah.
They are executed in the order or the inverse order into which you declare them. How does that work when you have model inheritance? And all of a sudden, when you are manipulating collections of objects, that is a surefire way for N+1 queries in your code base.
Yeah.
So we have decided to forbid the use of callbacks and go towards a service layer with service objects that manipulate collections of objects to optimize the operations and what would previously be callbacks for collections of objects.
Nice. Is that kind of like the form object pattern? Are you familiar with that?
We are, I would say, what distinguishes our culture is we are very pragmatic. And so we don't lean so much towards very heavily formalized patterns or software development practices that are kind of off the shelf. We try to get a very good understanding of what is our specific friction point and come up with the tailored solution for that specific friction point.
Right. I think that's actually really sensible. It's funny when you talk about the callback hell. I used to use callbacks. I believe in the thoughtbot guides, we also recommend not using them, but I've definitely been in a position where there are callbacks. And once, like you said, there's the problem of the order, the n+1 queries, and then you also see like conditionals put on the callbacks a lot of the time. And it gets really, really difficult. And then you have kind of your model essentially knows way too much about what's going on at the controller layer, because you're passing through a lot of, you end up passing through, what are they called? Maybe they're alias attributes or fake attributes. I can't remember what they are, that you can pass through attributes to a model. Yes. And then you end up doing conditionals on that. And yeah, it can become an absolute nightmare. So having that service layer is good.
You end up passing attribute accessors, I think.
Yes, that's the one. Thank you, attribute accessors. It's really cool. I mean, look, the fact that you're dealing with those technical challenges, and you've done that at scale, the way that you kind of have this standardization and these principles must be super helpful for your developers. My thoughts then go to is where do you see? So you've got, well, how would you? Do you clarify yourselves as like a startup still? Because how are you able to? Can you still kind of move quickly, deploy quickly? Or you must be under a certain level. Like you talked about, okay, let's make sure like CI is quick, for example. But there must be a certain level of bureaucracy to now kind of like deploy to production. So where how quick are you able, how agile are you is the right word? And do you see yourself still as like in a startup environment?
Obviously, maintaining the same agility as when we were 5 or 10 engineers is a fight against the rising tide. And if you've ever built a sandcastle on the seashore with the rising tide, you know how challenging and sometimes futile it is.
Yeah.
The good news is, as grown-ups, we have better tools than just sand and buckets. We can actually use concrete, and that works better against the tide. We still deploy our application to production every 15 minutes throughout the day.
Really? Oh, that's amazing.
We have a new live version going out to customers every 15 minutes. And that works very well. That actually provides a lot of value for us, because that means that the changes that we deploy every 15 minutes are small. If we have a regression, we don't need to look through 500 commits to find it. We just have to look through 5, 10, or 15.
Yeah.
But that comes at a cost. We need to invest in this tooling. We need to invest in this delivery infrastructure, just like we need to invest in our CI pipeline to make sure that we aggressively measure, track down the inefficiencies, the wasted time, and make it run smoothly.
That's unbelievable that you're deploying every 15 minutes. I've worked on some financial projects at thoughtbot. About 2 years ago, I was on one with a bank, and one of the hardest things was convincing them that actually deploying smaller vertical slices every single day is going to be better than our scheduled once a week deployment. So we used to have like 5 p.m., after the banking hours, bring the site down, deploy, have QA do some kind of like manual checks on top of our automated testing. And then like, that's the deploy for the week. And if you miss that deployment window, it's kind of gone. And then if anything goes wrong, so in that deployment window, you back up the database, you do, and if anything goes wrong, you then roll back. I try to argue, I don't know if you'll agree with this, that sometimes it's better to invest in the ability to react than the ability to prevent. So get your prevention level as good as you can. but then focus on the other side of the wall is if we can react really quickly. And like when you kind of got these like really small commits or deployments you can easily revert, that allows you to react quickly, you're actually potentially in a better position.
I agree with this. Yes. The interesting dimension on this is what is your cost of outage or a problem? And specifically, will rolling back be enough, or will you also need to go and fix the data? Right? If your API contract was not strict enough, or you didn't have the right validations, if you have wrong code in production, then you have wrong data in your database, and that can be very time-consuming to fix. And typically, I find that it's worth having a higher level of safety on the data model layer to make sure that you're not ingesting any wrong data, that you have the right unique constraints on your table ahead of time, because retrofitting it is very expensive. You need to find duplicate data and handle it some way. And so spend extra time on your data model and validation layer. But if you have a bug in the front end, you can deploy a new version, everybody will get it, and poof, the problem goes away. Whereas if you have bad data in the database, it can linger for weeks. You need to figure out how to detect it. Maybe the query to find it is very expensive. It does not run on your database. It can be a nightmare, and it will linger for a long time. So there are different places of the stack where mistakes are more expensive or less expensive, and that, to me, that informs which cursor we need to set in terms of safety versus speed.
What I'm loving about this conversation is I think you're very unique because you're operating as a founder, but with an engineering background. And sometimes when I work with founders, like I have to try and give over a lot of these principles and values about why the quality is really important, and an engineering background that is ultimately to help them with their product and their business. But because you have that background, you're almost setting yourself up for great success by thinking about the principles and the quality. Like your biggest asset or your most valuable asset is your code base, and you're able to look after that. And I would say that's probably a massive reason for your success.
I would challenge you actually on this.
Go on. Challenge me, go ahead.
Specifically in 2026, where coding is getting cheaper with the two-letter acronym that we all know and we have in our head, A and I. I find that our greatest asset is actually our understanding of the domain that we work in and the pain points of our customers. The software, if we were to lose it, if it disappeared from our repo, from our laptop, if we have the knowledge and understanding of what our customers need, we would be able to rebuild it, not overnight, but relatively quickly, because we've made these mistakes in the past and we have that scar tissue. If somebody else got their hands on this software, but they don't have the knowledge on why we build things this way and how do we operate it and what are the drawbacks of this software, it would be worthless to them. Whereas I think the real asset for this business is what's in our employees' head in terms of product understanding, business domain understanding, taxes, accounting, etc. And that's where we need to continue to invest to get better, because as a byproduct, the software will get better if our staff and engineers and product managers and designers get better at understanding these problems. So I really think the asset is we are a business of knowledge and understanding of our customers. Our asset is how good is our understanding and how many people do we have that are competent in understanding and delivering solutions to these problems. Software almost feels kind of a byproduct of this, and that byproduct becomes gradually cheaper as we leverage the right AI tools and documentation in terms of guiding code to be right almost on the first shot, provided we have the right prompt and we don't delegate the prompt to an AI.
So that's what I was going to lead with that question is I was going to say, is AI posing a risk to the quality of your code base? How much are your engineers using it and how much are you investing in it?
We're at the beginning of the AI story at Pennylane. I think it's clear that AI has some significant benefits, but I think the ROI of AI is uneven depending on how you use it and the problem at hand. Once again, I don't think you can delegate to the AI your product decisions. These need to come from your own understanding as a software engineer, as a product engineer, as I like to call them. Understanding what it is you need to build, what trade-offs you need to make in terms of product decisions, also in terms of, well, you need to get it out faster, but it will be less feature complete or more of an MVP feature because you want to learn. These are decisions you need to make explicitly, and that will be in your prompt in terms of what you want to build and what you don't care about. Actually deciding how to build the controller endpoint, that is something that is now so standardized in our code base that we could almost have a Rails generator generate it, and it would be 90% of the way there. And with the right AI coding tool, we can get to 98%.
Yeah, so, I agree with that, yeah.
So it poses risks to quality if we don't use it right. If we just give it the story that is written by the PM that is still relatively high level, then the AI will make a whole bunch of decisions by default for us and we won't even notice.
Agreed, yeah.
And so we need to be thoughtful about understanding exactly how we want this product to behave for a customer and what trade-offs we want to make, but actually delivering the code. Depending on the parts of the stack, once again, I think on the data layer, we need more caution and we need to be more meticulous. But once again, on the front end, this is not going to make our qualified front-end engineers obsolete anytime soon, but we can build many pages much quicker. And as I said earlier, there is less risk of getting it wrong because changing it does not incur having to fix any kind of data or anything of the sort.
So I definitely agree with that. You can be a lot more liberal with AI or risky with AI when there's kind of a low risk environment. I think the way you talk about using it is very healthy because you're saying use AI for a lot of that boilerplate, but make sure you have the goal is still the same. The goal is still I want to build this code base with a high level of quality. Will AI help me get there quicker? Will it, alleviate some of the extra work I have to do? Yes. And if it does do that, then great, go ahead and use it. Well, interestingly, what I found more recently is I find myself wondering whether it's that much quicker for me than when I'm doing test-driven development, because the test-driven development is write a test that fails and fix only exactly that failure. And so I move quite quickly with writing very little code. Whereas when I do it with AI, even if I write the test first and I say, solve these things, it often ends up writing more code than I would have. And you can alleviate that issue and you can prompt it. And I have, we use it at thoughtbot, and we use it with, we have Claude kind of skills that we share and Claude.mds that give a lot of context to the models. But sometimes I just find I'm still more productive and more lean using test-driven development, which is interesting.
The way I would react, so first of all, I think it goes beyond the boilerplate. I think AI can understand is a loaded word, but get insights from our documentation and other things that we've built. And it has general accounting knowledge baked in as well on our end. So I've been able really to, with reasonable prompting and not getting into a huge amount of detail, get something that is very close to a one-shot good implementation of specific accounting mechanisms. I would compare AI to a sharp knife. You can get hurt. You can build something that is negative ROI in terms of quality. You can get to 90% of the way very quickly because it's very sharp, but the last 10%, you may need another kind of tool to finish the job. Maybe you need a spoon, and AI is not a spoon. You should get the metaphor. And I find there are places where AI will be faster and there are places where AI will be slower because you're working on something that is really unique. You're working on something where providing the context in written form for the AI is going to be very time consuming for you. Or you're working on something where you know exactly how to get there and you are yourself trained on this. You've done it a gazillion times. And so you can get it right the first time. I think when we operate at scale with 400 engineers, if there are some things that are very straightforward, there is really meaningful ROI in documenting it very clearly and making sure the AI can find the documentation when it's working on a relevant task, because that will benefit 400 other engineers who are not always as experienced as you.
Yeah, I think there's, again, like a really pragmatic and sensible way to look at it. Like you look at it and say, you look at it with a fair amount of caution, but also with saying, this is a tool which can be utilized and it can help us. Before we kind of wind down, so your journey, like you've gone from an engineer to a founder. What is that step like for those people listening who are kind of engineers, have the ability to build products, have a product mindset? Like, how has that changed your work life going from coding to a founder role?
I think it's a lot of fun. Fundamentally, because I get exposed to many other topics, operational, strategic, sometimes even kind of philosophical, that are beyond just implementing features for customers. And I get to rely on my experience and my scar tissue and my intuition to steer the engineering organization in the direction that I find best, the direction that I find best for our customers in terms of providing the product that has the best quality, but also providing or steering in the direction that aligns best with my values and my engineering principles. And I think that level of influence on the organization and responsibility or accountability, when it goes right, then that's a point on my side for, I steered in the right direction. And when it goes wrong, it stings, but I learn from it and I get to reflect, and there's actual negative outcomes that are meaningful at scale for having taken the wrong decision. And I think that's also exhilarating.
It's really, really interesting to kind of, I think that's a very good perspective to have on the times when kind of you make decisions and it doesn't go the way that you expected. That's quite, I think, a resilient mentality, which is really, really nice to hear. So how do you then, as not the founder, but as Quentin, how do you wind down from it all?
You mean in the evening after work?
Let's talk after work, weekends. Like how? Because a lot of people who listen, right? There are a lot of founders who listen, product, business, PMs, developers, designers, and so we're in the weeds during the day. And how do you switch off? How do you wind down?
I have 3 little girls at home, which keep me busy, and with whom I spend meaningful amount of time reading a bedside story or playing a game or spending time at dinner. I seldom pick up my laptop on the weekends because it keeps one busy to have 3 children at home. Mm-hmm. My wife helps, but we're still outnumbered, so keeps us busy. And I find it's important. I mean, this job and this adventure is very exciting. There's a lot of adrenaline, and so it's fair to say I think about it day and night. I get to tone it down on weekends, for example, but it's still there somewhere in the background, and sometimes I have an illumination about a problem I'm trying to fix, technical or organizational.
That's a real engineering life.
Yeah, I have to write it down so I don't forget, because if I pop up on Monday and then I've forgotten about it, it's very frustrating. But I find it's important to have the right kind of balance with other centers of interest, whether going out for a run, going out for a drink with friends, having some kind of hobby at home, doing some building blocks with the children to get them also in their own engineering mindset, because that's an activity I very much enjoy with them. Making sure that work does not consume 100% of your brain time is a good safety net from when things are stressful at work or difficult, that you can find comfort somewhere else, because it's not always a smooth ride. even when the business is doing well, there can be periods of stress and tension. And so being able to dance on several feet is a good coping mechanism.
Yeah, I think wise words, and yeah, it really resonates for me. Kind of like just last night, like I don't know why this is, like abstractions in the code base always come to me when my head's on the pillow.
Absolutely.
Or like I'm in the shower, and last night I worked out this, like I have this abstraction, and this is what I was looking for. These two things that I've been playing with as separate entities, I worked out like a name that came to me that represents them as an abstraction, which I can then try and play around with. Look, I want to thank you so much for your time to come on and on the podcast and tell us a little bit about Pennylane and your background. And it's really interesting. So, we've got lots of people listening to this podcast from all different areas. I know that you're based in France, and that's currently where you operate. But if people have interest, firstly, do you have a roadmap to, let's say, expanding beyond France? And if people want to get hold of you and perhaps talk to you about that, they've listened to the success of your product and your incredible levels of growth, where's the best place they can do that?
So first of all, our home market and the market where we operate the most is currently in France. However, engineering is, we have a remote engineering organization throughout all of Europe. We have about 20 engineers based in the UK, 15 or 20 in Poland, plenty in Spain, Portugal, Romania, Germany. It's not that we are restricted to our home market for hiring on the engineering side. We are expanding commercially and product-wise to Germany this year, perhaps a second market towards the end of the year, or third market by the end of the year or early next year. Beyond that, time will tell. It's difficult to have a crystal ball there.
I think that's fair. And if people want to get hold of you, they listen to this podcast, they say, this is unbelievable, I want to invest massive amounts of money, where can they get hold of you?
Well, I'm not the one who's in charge of investments. You can find out who the CEO is and write him on LinkedIn. And if you have massive amounts of money and you can give us good conditions, we're always open to interesting proposals.
Yeah, and if any of you actually do that, I would just put my name as a reference, and I'll take the commission that we agreed on, Quentin, at the beginning of the call. So That would be great. You can find notes and a complete transcript for this episode at giantrobots.fm. If you have questions or comments, you can email us at hosts@giantrobots.fm. This podcast is brought to you by the wonderful people at thoughtbot. We're also Rails consultancy. And so if you have products that you're interested in building, tweaking, playing with, definitely get in touch. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.